Hello, everyone. Welcome to our July 2023 edition of our You Lead webinar. I'm Kelly King, and I'm the Women's Ministry Specialist at Lifeway. And thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to just preface this webinar with the fact that I'm actually on vacation. I didn't know that I was going to be scheduling vacation when we had this on our calendar. And I'm in a local coffee shop in Colorado. So you might hear some background noise, and I apologize. But when I'm not talking, so we don't have all of that background noise. I do want to have just a moment with you, just to maybe talk about a few little events that are coming up with Lifeway, because they may not be on your radar. And while I'm doing this, put your name. Some of you are already doing this because you know the drill. Put your name, where you're from. We want to be able to know who you're from. Some of you may be new to our webinars, and some of you, this may be like you sign up for all the webinars, and we have 2 months. I did want to make a comment about our You Lead 2.0 that's happening in Houston in September 7th and 8th. Or September 8th and 9th. Catherine, make sure that I get this right. I'm going to make sure I've got my dates right on that. It's September 8th and 9th. I just put 7th because I know that's when I've got to leave town. But this is going to be in the Houston, Texas area. But hey, this is for anyone. And the reason we're calling it You Lead 2.0 is not because it's an advanced track. It's because it's 2 days. We're starting on Friday afternoon, evening, and then Saturday through the afternoon. So you get twice as much opportunity to be equipped. And this is an incredible opportunity. We would love to see you there. We're going to have Elizabeth Woodson, Melissa Spolstra. They're going to be doing some general sessions. We have tons of breakouts. Tasha Calvert, that's on today. She's going to be one of our breakout leaders at this as well. So you don't want to miss that. We would love to see you there. Also, it's time, if you have not been thinking about women's leadership forum in November, this is a great time for you to sign up for that, and we would love to have you in Nashville in November. So make sure you go to lifeway.com/women's forum or forum. I think it'll direct you there and give you all the information there. And then finally, we have a new event that we just launched a couple weeks ago, and it is going to be an Advent digital event with Christy McClellan called Prepare Him Room. So you can go to lifeway.com/prepare him room, find out the details. But this would be a great Christmas event for you to do with women in your church. And it's already kind of done for you. I know my church is actually planning to do this as well. And so we're excited about having Christy teach us about the coming of Christ through the lens of just the first century. You know that she is a biblical culturalist. And so that is where she's going to land in this particular event. So check that out. That might be something you want to do. And then, of course, it is fall Bible study time. So we know you're looking at Bible studies. And so that's coming up. Adrienne Camp's got a new study called As For Me, which is on Psalms. There's a new study by Lifeway Women called Grateful. That's going to be also Bible studies. If you're not signed up for the Ministry to Women newsletter, you need to do that, because we do a giveaway for people who are on that newsletter list. And so this month we are actually giving away the book Flip the Script, which is also connected about generations and how we reach the next generation for Christ. So we felt like this was a really appropriate resource to give away. It's just some lucky winner that has signed up for the Ministry to Women newsletter. So go to lifeway.com/ministry news to sign up, and you can be entered to win that. All right. Lots of little commercials there today. Sorry about that. I'll tell you what, I'm going to do some introductions. I want you to get to know our panelists today. Sherry Edwards. Sherry, why don't we start with you? Tell us who you are, where you're from, a little bit about what you do in ministry.
Okay, great. Yes, I'm so happy to be on this webinar today. This is a topic that is very near and dear to me. My name is Sherry Edwards. I live in North Little Rock, Arkansas. I am a mom of 3 grown sons, a beautiful daughter-in-law, and 2 precious granddaughters, and another one on the way. And I've been doing women's ministry for over 25 years now, probably. And just have a love for women and serving in the local church I also teach ministry to women class at Ouachita Baptist University in Arkadelphia, Arkansas, and that really is where I have begun to really see and get some perspective from that younger generation and how they are perceiving older generations as women. So I love serving the church and serving women.
Thanks, Sherry. Tasha, tell us a little bit about you.
Absolutely. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm Tasha Calvert, and I actually serve as the women's minister at my church. I serve at Prestonwood Baptist Church in the Dallas, Texas area. We have a couple of campuses that I give oversight to, but long before I was in vocational ministry, I was running a women's ministry out of my house. I have 4 daughters. 2 are married, 2 are, well, one's got her foot out the door this fall, but then I've got one that'll still be at home for a little bit. I just really do have a heart for women and love the local church. I host a podcast called Digging In with Tasha Calvert, where we just talk about how to take what we're learning in scripture and apply that to our daily lives. I love God's word. I'm big and passionate on biblical literacy and love getting to partner with Lifeway to really just equip women in churches to do the good work that God's called us to do.
Thanks so much. And Denise O'Donoghue. Denise, you're definitely not last on our list, but you're just at the bottom of my screen. So give us a little introduction.
Hey, everybody. I'm Denise O'Donoghue, and I am from Raleigh, North Carolina. I presently serve as the Director of Counseling Training for our church, Imago Dei. Prior to that, I served women through Southeastern Seminary and taught classes in ministry to women. And I, too, like Sherry, really developed a passion for this subject when I began hanging out with and teaching young students at Southeastern. And so I'm excited about this conversation today. I do have 2 grown daughters and I have 6 grandchildren.
You know, it really does help when your children and your grandchildren, you think about different generations. Like we all minister to different generations in our family as well. So that is definitely part of this conversation. And we do have a couple of polls. If you've never been on our webinar, we usually like to get some information from you. So let me launch our first poll. The first thing we want to find out is we want to ask you, we want to find out a little bit about your age so that we can kind of see about how old you are. So I'm launching this. And if you can just click on that and say what age category you fall in, that helps us kind of know who's on this webinar. So good, you've got this. We are getting this done pretty quick. Awesome. I'm going to give you just a couple more seconds to finish that out. All right, I'm going to end the poll and I'm going to share the results. So it looks like 39% of you, almost 40% of you are 60 and older. So that's really telling of this particular webinar. That may mean that you just have time to do the webinars, but also is this a reflection of some of our ministry. And only 4% of you are under the age of 30. So those are part of the questions that we have. And how do we reach the next generation? I'm going to go to the next poll too, because this is a different kind of question, but we wanted you to kind of, we want to see how you feel about this one. Okay, hang on. I'm going to try to launch this for a second. It says a poll has been launched. I've got to stop the other poll. Sorry about that. I'm going to go back in here and stop sharing that one. And then I'm going to go back to the next one. I'm going to launch this next one. And it is how you would describe your current ministry to women in your local church. Would you say it's intergenerational, which is all generations are involved together, multi-generational, which means you have several generations, but they don't necessarily work together very well, or one-dimensional, that you feel like your ministry is just hitting one generation, or maybe you just don't know. So that's fine too. Feel free to answer it that way. So this is good. Sorry about that. Got to turn off my notifications. I usually do that, so. All right, this is going well too. Okay. Interesting. Okay, about all of you have participated in the poll. If you're watching this on your Bible time, sometimes the polls are not as easy to do. So let me share the results. This is a good, I think this probably is really interesting. So for our panelists to know, 40% are saying that really their ministry is intergenerational, and 40% is probably what we consider multi-generational, but maybe they're each kind of doing their own thing. So that helps. So thank you all for kind of answering this, because that helps us get kind of some questions as we start as well. So Sherry, I want us just to start with, why is this conversation so important? And I feel like this is a conversation and a question we get all the time. So why is it important for us to talk about it?
Yeah, and so I feel like one of the other questions too is that why are we still talking about this? I know it's a topic that comes up a lot with the women that I talk with. Another role that I have is just to encourage and equip some of the women's ministry leaders here in my state. And it is a topic that we're continually dealing with. And so that leads us to ask, why are we still asking the question? Why are we still dealing with it? And then also, why is it important? And I believe that it is important for us to, and the older I get, the more important it becomes to me, because I think the onus is on us as older leaders to teach the younger women, to train them, to equip them, to come alongside them, and to see that growth that can occur between women of different generations. And I think that is important as well as we think about our role as women in the church, as followers of Christ, to teach the next generation. And there are a lot of indicators. There are a lot of statistics that are coming out about these generations that are coming up, how they are not finding those relationships that are going to tell them about God's word and about who Jesus is in their everyday life. And so I also think that it's important to consider some of the assumptions that we make, some assumptions that older generations might make about younger generations, some that younger generations might make about older generations, and just start those conversations. And I think it's important for us to think about creating intentional ways for us to think about how to make generations, make ministry intergenerational and flowing together as women.
Yeah, I think it is something that, like, we never finish this conversation, because there's always another generation coming, for sure. Denise, let's talk about in ministry in particular, and Sherry even kind of mentioned Titus too. So we kind of go back to that. Also, like, how do we include this subject for our churches and for the future?
Ellie, I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can.
All right. So just thinking about, why is this subject important for our churches and for the future of our churches, and how we talk about Titus 2. But when we think about Titus 2, does that sometimes get kind of
Miscommunicate?
Kind of miscommunicate?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think one of the things that is often not thought about is, today, in the culture that we live in today, a lot of our women are first generation Christians. They didn't grow up in a Christian home. And so as the church, we want to come alongside them and disciple them and help them to grow in their faith, because they're the future leaders of the church. And so we want to be investing in them. And I think too, in my mom's generation, for example, families lived in close proximity to one another. So your mom was just down the road, or your aunt, or your sister, and now people are scattered all over the world. And so they don't have that benefit either. So the church needs to step in and be that family figure for them. And as you said, Sherry did mention Titus 2. And I think in my experience, a couple of ways Titus 2 has gotten confused over the years is the fact that women of the older generation think that Titus 2 means that they have to have all the answers. They need to know the answer to every question that any young person might answer. And to them, that defines what it means to be in a Titus 2 relationship. And also another miscommunication that comes out is that Titus 2 is only for married women, because in that instruction to the church, a lot of that is directed towards how wives are to treat their husbands and that sort of thing. And so I think those are two big miscommunications that have come out of or seem to be carried along, continue to be carried along with the concept of Titus 2 ministry.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Denise. And again, I apologize. I know someone mentioned that my connection isn't great, and so I'm so sorry about that. I'm kind of in a coffee shop in Colorado trying to do this, so I apologize for bad connections on that end as well. So, Tasha, if this is an important conversation, if we know that we have biblical mandates to have, like, to reach the next generation, how do we become intentional to include all of the generations? What are some steps we can take?
Absolutely. I thought what both Sherry and Denise have shared is so important. And I think you've touched on something, even the way you phrased your question, which is that we must be intentional. Left to our own devices, we kind of tend to block with our comfortable or the people that would normally be in our pathways. And so I think just the fact that we include intentionality in that is going to be something important. You know, as a good Baptist, I have 4 P's that I think are kind of good when we're thinking about intergenerational ministry. The first one I would say is pray and purpose. So, you know, we want to start everything we do within ministry with, literally everything we do within our lives with prayer. And I think sometimes that's just a given that, oh, yeah, of course we're going to pray about it. But again, to take that word, that qualifier, intentionally pray, not just about the general health of your ministry or the general direction, but Lord, would you help me connect these women intergenerationally, because we need that perspective. Denise, you know, you said answers. Sometimes we shirk away from this because we feel like we don't have the answers to model that to younger women. We need perspective, not always answers. It's not the answer they're looking for. It's the fact that you, as older women, and then those underneath us as younger women, we have different experiences and perspectives that need to be brought. God's word is intergenerational. So we want to make sure we are also understanding it that way. So pray, and then purpose. I would say we as leaders, we as people that are embarking to have an intergenerational ministry, we need to be purposeful about having different women in walks of life within our own circles. I need to have someone older than me that regularly speaks into me, that's pouring into me, that's discipling me. I need to also have relationships, purposeful relationships with younger people so that I have their perspective. So rather than kind of putting ourselves as leaders up here and then we're going to do this, we want to be purposeful about having those things. And then the third P I would say is platform. Now, I know everybody, if you're in a small church, you may be like, I'm not platforming anyway, but platforming happens. Think of it more like a verb, and that happens even by just you're giving credibility to different people of all ages, having relationships with those women, giving them points of leadership, even if sometimes it's just having them make an announcement. It's giving away a little bit of your leadership platform to other women of different generations, so people begin to see themselves, whatever stage they're in, as part of your ministry. And then the last thing I would say is programming. You want to be intentional about sometimes giving them opportunities to relate to one another intergenerationally. One example of this is at our church, we have a class that is for young moms. And what we do, though, is we have intentional older women that come in and sit at these tables. And so they serve as mentors. And then the funny thing is we have like moms, maybe a little bit younger than me. And then we try to have at every table also a grandmother perspective. So we've intentionally programmed in this one class 3 generations that are always going to be in the mix and speaking into the conversations that happen in that class. And so that's, I think, a good place for us to start.
Tasha, I love that you did that kind of that intentional putting people like at those tables. Did you have difficulty in finding people who were willing to do that? Like, or how did you recruit them? Because I think that's another question I get from people.
Yes, we do. We do sometimes have difficulty. And here's what I would say. It is a lot of times it is exactly what Denise was talking about. I don't feel like I have any wisdom to offer. I didn't do it right when I was raising young kids, or my kid's a prodigal now. You really want me at your table? So a lot of it is usually about their self-esteem, their experiences, or even their comfort level. Like, I don't really like being before people. So what we have tried to do is, again, going back to that P with programming, we take the guesswork out of it. And, it's about having one-on-one conversations that, Kelly, if I were coming to you and saying, I would love for you to come and be a part of this class, I would say, you don't need to have the answers. I'm going to already provide for you the curriculum. We're going to have discussion questions that are available. There is no right or wrong. It is okay to say, I don't know. And we are not going to make you stand up in front of the whole group. That's a lot of times. Sometimes it's very practical that these women are like, I'm not a front of the room type of person. And so I think when you can address some of the things that possibly are going on underneath them, and then plan for them, that we are going to give you everything you need. We just need your perspective. We just want your experience. And a churchy word we could say with that is testimony. A lot of people are willing to share their testimony. Now when you frame it as you're the authority and giving it, well, that's a little more uncomfortable. But people, if you're a believer, God's given you a testimony. And so sometimes just using that language, we'd love for you to come and over the course of a semester, share your testimony of motherhood with these women. That sometimes takes a little bit of the fear away from it.
Yeah, because I think if you've got women who just their life experience, that's what they want to hear. They want to know the practical things of how did you get through this, or how just how are you doing things. And one of the things I realized too is that when you think about younger moms, they kind of need those people who are just ahead of them, because they feel like, okay, they just went through this. So how do you deal with that too? And we've been kind of throwing around some terms. Denise, I'm going to ask you to jump in, because you kind of did your dissertation on this and you really help identify. We talked about what is intergenerational ministry and multi-generational. So would you kind of give us some definitions so that we can kind of see the difference between that?
Sure. Any church that has more than one generation of members in it is multi-generational. So unless your church is all, exactly the same generation, then you are a multi-generational church. However, that doesn't mean you're an intergenerational church. When you're an intergenerational church, that means that the generations know each other. They have relationships with one another. They interact and care about one another. So it's multi-generational that actually then knows one another. You can think of it, I guess, a good way. And maybe if you wanted to define the ideal, it would be, we operate like a family, knowing and caring about each other. So that's the goal, is the intergenerational ministry.
Yeah, because I think sometimes we see a church where we see maybe senior adult women over here, and then we kind of see maybe young adult women over here, but they don't know each other. And so it's trying to kind of get them to work together and doing those relationships and being intentional, like Tasha mentioned. And okay, so let's even do something else, because I think it's always helpful, Sherry. Let's define a little bit about the generations, because we have a lot of generations that are alive right now. So can you give us just a brief rundown? I think that would be helpful in this conversation.
Yeah, this is something that came up in a session that we did with some of the women's ministry leaders that are local around me. We did a breakout session, and one of my younger leaders shared how she had come into her role as a young leader and was really trying to connect and make this intergenerational process happen with the women in her church. It's a smaller church. And so she created some opportunities for them to gather and host homes and mixed up the generations and just created those opportunities. And one of the resources that that was helpful to her was, and I think we're going to have it available in the resources, is just some of the descriptors about all of the generations that are probably in a lot of our churches. And you have, let's see, you have the senior adult women. Just some of those descriptors are that they were born, and they're called the greatest generation. You know, the ones who have endured a lot of hardship, the Great Depression, World War II. And you're not going to hear a lot of their personal stories, because that generation was taught not to, they didn't talk about their personal stuff. And so they raised a generation that didn't share personal things. And I think we have to understand those differences, because our younger generations are wanting to hear. They want to hear the stories of the older women. And so our older women need to be learning how to share some of those things. How did you endure, World War II, or even the Vietnam era war, all of the things that came out. So the boomer, I think the next one is like the boomer generation. That's the baby boomers that were born in, I guess, the 60s, and all of the cultural things that were happening during that time. And then we have Gen X women that are in there. I'm kind of roughly, y'all correct me here, 30s and 40s, I guess 30s, 40s. Would be our millennials. And then we have young adult, and then college, and then Gen Z. So understanding some of the things that have affected each generation are going to help us learn a little bit more about the women that that are in our churches, and then asking questions about their lives, and being willing to share together, and creating those intentional opportunities. One of the stories that this young leader shared was that after they had begun creating these opportunities, and they do these on a regular basis, she noticed an older member and a younger member that were kind of hanging around afterward and just having conversation, and that just made her heart so happy. And they had continued just to meet one-on-one for coffee, because they had developed that relationship and just began to learn and to know each other. And I think that goes to the fact, start where you are. You don't have to wait for someone to plan a program. Start with the women that you know that are around you, that are with you, and take that step. You be the one to initiate, whether you're the older, whether you're the younger. We all have someone who is a little ahead of us in life. We all have someone who's a little behind us in life. And I think it goes back to that mandate, where we are commanded. And I think that's another point that has really become important to me in these later years, because it's broken my heart. I had a couple of my college students last year come to me after class or in between class and said, "Miss Sherry, I am really wanting someone, an older woman, to mentor me, and I've been turned down." And that broke my heart, because it goes back to that fact of, we don't have to have all the answers. We just have to share who God is to us, how he's been faithful in our lives, and tell of his works to the next generation. And I think that we are mandated to do that. And the onus is on us to do that with our younger women.
Yeah. Okay. So I know probably the largest generations in our churches at that time. So this is the boomers, Gen X, and the millennials. But in the last 5 years, like, we've seen Gen Z moving into our ministry. This is our youngest generation that's really we consider in women's ministry. There's a new generation called Gen Alpha, which they're kind of coming into the teen years. So we haven't really included them, but we really need to start talking about Gen Z. So Tasha, what have you learned about Gen Z, and what should we be looking for? What are some differences in the way that they, maybe the way they respond to ministry, and the way that we need to?
So what I would say is, and I've kind of got kids around this age, so I've kind of observed it more from like the inside out than just the outside looking in, which has probably been helpful. But, one thing that really earmarks Gen Z is that they are living in the information age, and really all of their life have lived in the information age, which means that they can find anything they want out without leaving the couch. And some of them do that. So I would say they're less personally sociable with one another. They see less need for in-person fellowship. Now hear me say this. That doesn't mean they have less need for fellowship and in-person relationships, but the felt need is less than some of the other generations. And so they are not, it is more difficult to get them to events. It is more difficult to get them to in-person Bible studies, and it is more difficult to explain and express the need that we know exists within the body of Christ to have really strong, rich intergenerational relationships. And so we're kind of in a quandary, honestly. Like when we were taking that poll at the beginning, Kelly, it's not super surprising to me that our smallest amount of people are the under 30s live. Now, what will be interesting is, I bet you anything, if they ever have this question of, do I want to go back and look at that? They look at things on their own time. So you having live events, you having a fixed church service, what we are seeing is that is becoming more and more difficult for that generation, because they kind of do things on their terms. They work on their terms. So not to overemphasize that, but it's something to consider. And, I know that there's part of me that wrestles with, well, we don't kowtow to that, and this is the church and we need them there. But I think it is a worthy question to say, how do we help them feel the need that we know they have for connection with God's people, fellowship, with the gathering of the church? And how do we do that? And so I think it is going to be relationally. The one thing that we have not seen generations change is the hardwiring that God has placed in us from the Garden of Eden, which is that men and women are created differently. And what we see is that women are nurturers. We're relational. We have more words on average than men. And so I think it's going to have to start with the relational piece. Now, you can program. I think, we have to be more sensitive. We do a lot of online stuff. We connect. I mean, we're big on social media. That's just kind of a piece of our landscape at this point from a programming and church perspective. But I think we've got to kick it old school. And the reality is, my generation and older, I'm 50 years old, we understand we need to have connection. And I think the onus is on us to model that, because we've seen the benefits of it. And I think it's intentional, relational, doing things, going out of our comfort zone to reach out to those people and show them this perspective, because it's not something they feel like they need.
Yeah. I recently heard, we did a marked podcast with Amy Jo Gardier, who she knows a lot about generations, and we talked to her about this, and we talked a little bit about how it's different, like leaders, where leaders fit in, that leaders have always been kind of in the middle. But for Gen Z, leaders are kind of on the outside because they want to create it themselves. Like they want to have the ownership. They want to be able to customize, and they want to be able to do that. So that does affect the way that we program things as women's ministry leaders. We have to consider the differences there. I do want to talk, Denise, for a second. Let me ask you this question.
Kelly, you're frozen. I think I'll just go ahead and answer what I think you were going to ask me, which is how can we as leaders be...
I think it's one I have this conversation with women's leaders. But
okay, I hope this is going through.
I was frozen. I'm so sorry. So, Denise, did you catch that?
I think I got the gist of it. Let me go ahead and jump in. Okay, I think as far as influence, I think there's a lot of things we can do, and you and Tasha both kind of set me up well to answer this question. I think one of the key things that I discovered as I've been grappling with this for a couple of decades now is we need to educate one another, kind of what Tasha was just doing and what Sherry did is, if I don't understand what another generation, how another generation works, I'm not gonna know how to interact with them. And I am so sad that I don't remember where I read this, but I love this analogy. You would not go into a foreign country and try to interact with and evangelize and disciple people of another country without learning their language and their culture. And I think that is so important when we're talking about generations. We need to understand the language and the culture of these other generations. So, for example, people in my mother's generation may have had an email address, but they would never remember the password. So if all you're doing is sending them emails, you're not going to communicate. The best way to communicate with that generation is to pick up the phone and make a phone call. And so that's what I mean when I'm talking about language. And so somebody younger, their language is going to be perhaps text messaging because they can respond to that, as Tasha said, when they feel like it on their own time. So I think education is just huge because otherwise we categorize, we make blanket decisions, or we may say, we may just dismiss a whole generation because we think they don't want to be involved. They don't care. They don't want to be part of this ministry. I think too, another thing that's really important, and this kind of goes to Tasha's point, we need to bring these people into the fold, all of the generations. So if your church has a Gen Z in them, your women's ministry needs to have Gen Z people working alongside of everybody else. Hopefully your entire team is reflective of what your church looks like. So I think that's really important. I think we need to model it. If we're not doing it, why should anybody else? So we need to be the first ones out there building relations with people that are not of our same generation. And I think we need to talk to our pastor because ultimately, when I did my research for my dissertation, the overwhelming response is it needs to start at the top and it needs to come from the pulpit, that this is biblical.
Yes, and I think I'm going to tag on, Denise, to a little bit that you were sharing there, which was so helpful, that was making me think about, how can we take that next step, understanding and educating ourselves about generations on both ends and understanding those differences from a leadership perspective. I was thinking about one of the things that I've been learning about as well as I've thought about as a younger woman, like everything is programmed when you're coming up through the church. You've got student ministry, you've got college ministry. Because I'm like, why is there this disconnect? Why are we still asking this question? And so that made me think about, well, you're in student ministry, you're going to be discipled with other students. You're in college ministry, you're going to be discipled with college ministry discipleship. But then you're out in the world and you get, you're a young adult and you find yourself in a church and everything's already happening. The women's ministry is going, but you don't really feel a part because you just don't know where you fit. And I feel like there's a gap between college age women and until they get into their 30s or so before they really understand, well, nobody really needs me. I don't really fit here. And so that started me thinking about how can we as leaders really create those opportunities and start to notice the younger women that are coming behind us and value them. That goes back to your point of letting them know that we value their perspective. Because another thing that I hear is, and this can come across as from older women, is they're kind of judgmental or telling them how they're not doing it right. And that can be a turnoff for our younger generations. And so we want to be mindful that we're including them in those conversations. And so we're thinking about how can we plan ministry, or how can we look at ways to incorporate how to minister to younger generations. And I think that creating, like Tasha said, the relationship, it's really all about the relationship. we don't have to have a lot of things in place. It's really about how are we coming alongside them, including them, starting to notice them, bringing them into our conversations, into our planning. They are some of the most creative thinkers and ministry planners that I've come across. Ever. I love their ideas. They are thinking about ways to connect women. They are thinking about ways to get beyond the church because they have a real heart for the lost. They have a real heart to connect with women and with other people who may not look like what we look like. So I think that we have to think about valuing them, creating ways to include them, mix up those ages, like take that initiative, like we've been saying, and just start to notice them and build ministry that's going to include them and value them. And they are looking for that. They want to be used. They're gifted. They're creative. They can help you with social media. Like if you're having trouble reaching women in your church, let a Gen Zer help you out because they know how to do that. And they have a heart for the Lord and for others to know Jesus.
Yeah, Kelly, let me jump in 1 second, if you don't mind, because what Sherry just said is absolutely true. And it's also a great place where there's going to be air between the generations if there's not education. So for example, the reason why this generation she's talking about is so creative, or one of the reasons, certainly not the only reason, is this generation has grown up playing video games, right? And you have to be creative and think outside the box in order to level up and get to the next level. So they have been schooled in how do I think outside the box, and that creativity just boils over from that. But if you don't know that, you're going to look at them and say, well, all they want to do is play video games, and just completely discount them. So that was a great example of what I was talking about.
Yeah, Tasha, I'm going to have you jump in for a second and talk about, Denise, you touched on this and Sherry, you did too, on the way that we communicate, because different generations respond differently, and technology is different for different, generations as well. So how do you deal with that? How do you communicate and get your message across, or like even just, telling people about your Bible studies or events? Like you've got to think of all the different ways to reach different generations. So how do you do that, Tasha?
Okay, you're not going to like this answer. Like, you have to do every bit of it. And there are some of those things that are like really within your comfort zone, and there are some that are not. So we had an event about 3 weeks ago, maybe it was 2 weeks ago, and it was pancakes in pajamas. And it was just a game night. Like it's summer, we were just trying to do something fun. Okay, we've announced this from the platform at our North campus, which is a little bit of a smaller campus. It's not small, but it's smaller than our bigger campus. And so that was this event. So we announced it from the pulpit. We sent an email. We sent text messages. We called the directors of our life groups, which is Sunday school for those of us who have been around the block a few times. So called our Sunday school teachers. Then we put social media posts out. So it is funny to me because I will sometimes poll my women and say, how did you check, social media? I would say Instagram, like, I personally have always been a Facebook person. The 30 and under crowd, maybe even a little older than that at this point, more like 35 and under. They are not on Facebook. They might have an account, but they are regularly checking Instagram. So for that event, we literally did phone calls. And then here is what's funny. I went to lunch with somebody, pretty connected woman, honestly, in our church. And that day of the event, and I said, are you coming tonight to Pancakes in Pajamas? And she said, I haven't even heard of it. And I said, well, come and meet me there and come a little early and help me set up. And she came that day by personal invitation. She's, she's a little bit, probably my age or a little bit older. So sadly, I mean, when we're talking about being intentional, I wish there was a one size fits all, but it is not. If you are really going to be intentional about reaching your women and pulling them in, you kind of have to meet them where they are, because they are not in the same place. I mean, try and call a 25-year-old, see if they pick up, not your daughter or something, just call somebody that's 25. I promise you they will not pick up the phone. But if you DM them on Instagram, you'll get an immediate response. It's all over the map right now.
It's a struggle, and it's true. And I've heard it said that you need to do it 7 different times for someone to hear the message once, but that could be 7 different ways that you even do it, or 7 ways the same. I mean, we see that at Lifeway. We have events all the time, and people go, I had no idea you were doing that event. And so it is a constant struggle of just how do we get the communication out there. And so we have to think about all those different ways. And I appreciate that. Denise, I want us to talk practically too. So how do we develop Bible studies, fellowships, things like that in the local church that reach different generations?
Yeah, I think one of the coolest examples I got when I was doing my research is having 2 generations pair together to teach a Bible study. That can be one way to do it. I think somebody, maybe Tasha or Sherry, I'm not sure which, mentioned doing the 3 different generations in the moms group. That's a great example of how you can do that. And when you put 2 people together to serve that are from different generations, I think naturally as they prepare and get ready to do this leadership, they're going to get to know one another. It's just a byproduct that happens. And if they get to know one another, they're most likely going to really enjoy it. And if they really enjoy it, they're going to talk about it. And I think that is one thing that just really, it's a ripple effect, right? You talk about how we can get this going in our church. I think that's one way to do it. I think another example might be to just, in all of this discussion, I think as leaders, we need to be thinking, who are our 2 or 3 key people that we know will be on board with this? And we need to start with them. Don't get discouraged. If you send out a blanket poll and nobody responds, really look for your key people to get this thing rolling. And maybe you have a few key older women that have the gift of hospitality that would love to just host a group of younger women in their home and get to know them, or maybe have 2 or 3 that serve with them. Maybe it's something that they do over a period of time, maybe not necessarily a Bible study, but maybe something about, just what does it look like to be a godly woman, and just have those conversations around a table. Fellowship time around a table can be some of the biggest growth areas that can happen. And so that is one way. And then 2, I think, anytime we're serving together, that's a way to build relationships. And so, you immediately think about, okay, well, let's go on a mission trip together, or let's do that. Well, maybe some of your members of your older generation are not physically able to go on a mission trip. However, at this stage in their life, maybe they have a little bit more discretionary funds where they can support a mission trip financially, or maybe they don't. Maybe they could be enlisted to pray, specifically enlisted to pray for that group, so that they feel connected to this group of people that are doing this work. They're serving together in different capacities, but that is forcing the interaction. So I think those are all good ways.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so we only have about 2 minutes left, and we do have some questions in the Q&A. If you haven't posted a question and you want to do that, now it's like a time to do that. So panelists, let me just kind of go through some of you have answer. The first 50, Catherine put in the chat section up, and so Ken's got that. You can see where kind of the different. A really good question, you guys. How do you, so like not just multi-generational, multicultural, and I may have frozen, so sorry about that. Multicultural, how do we address that? Who wants to jump in on that? Go, Tasha.
And let me just say, in general, I don't think churches do this well. So let me just say, I would not consider that I'm speaking from a point of expertise. I think this is kind of, I think churches are pretty pretty culturally uniform for the most part. But I would say a lot of the things, the principles that we've talked about today could be employed with multicultural ministries, in the sense that you want to be intentional, you want to be prayerful, you want to program things. One thing that we tossed around with our up at our one of our meetings with our staff was, we are starting to see a large Indian population in our particular area and a large African population within our area. And so we opened up our church to have a, I don't remember, pardon me, because I do not remember the holiday it was, but there was some type of culturally significant holiday for the African community, and they were looking for a place to host that event. And so we opened up our building for that. We've thought about just ways to make connections, inroads with those events and those people groups. And so I do think, there's small little things. Personally, I again think that is going to be going back to the relational aspect. I think all of that starts with having and discipling your women to have a heart for people that are different than them, different ages, stages, cultures. And so just encouraging and using that language of, all people are welcome, and we would really love to see, more diversity, platforming those people. By platforming that, you are giving away some of your leadership collateral to, hey, there's different people. I have relationships with different cultures, and they have value. They bring value to the conversation. So I don't think it's an easy answer, because again, I think left to our own, we tend to flock to what we're comfortable, what's known. Maybe comfortable is not the best word, what's known to us. And we're more familiar with our own cultures. But I think we need to do that. I think it's a great question.
I agree, Tasha. I think it's hard sometimes, especially if your entire church is struggling to be multicultural. And so, but when you can make those connections, that's such an important part, because we need to learn from each other, and we do need to have kind of an understanding of even the cultures in our communities, of who's there. And so that's good. Another question that came in, and I think this is interesting, because she's not the first person who's told me this. She's in her 20s, and she says, I'm struggling to get the older generation of women involved in my women's ministry activities. They don't want to come. So how do you get an older woman to buy into what you're doing? So kind of that opposite question that we get. Okay, Sherry, go for it.
Yeah, this was the situation that my young leader friend found herself in. She was 27 years old, and she had come on staff as the women's ministry leader, and she was, leading women who were older, mostly older than her, and just struggling as to where to start. And so that's what that generations piece that I talked about, that was the piece that when she began to really understand and communicate with them, and maybe rethink the things that you're planning, because something that you're planning that your generation might be interested in, is it valuable to your older women? And then get them to kind of flip that script, like that book. I don't even know what that book's about, but thinking about valuing them. You want to value them and ask them, get them to help you plan some of the things, get their perspective. And maybe it's not just planning, but it's going to go back to, I want to understand more about who you are and how the Lord has made an impact in your life. And so creating, maybe in a smaller setting, around some tables like we've talked about, just some questions that get that conversation started. And that's what my friend did. She began to just plan some intergenerational gatherings in homes, and the women would gather together. And I think she provided some starter questions to get that conversation going. And once that was the first step, that moved beyond that gap or that barrier. And it is hard. And I'll just put the onus on the older women. You've got to It's, just because you have raised your kids and kind of done your thing doesn't mean you get out of being a part of ministry. One of my favorite stories in scripture is the mother of Jesus, Mary. Where do we see her after Jesus has died and resurrected? She could have easily said, you know what, I've done my thing. I've raised the Son of God. I need a break. Where do we see her? She's right there at the start of the early church in Acts 1, praying and being part of the start of the spread of the gospel. And so I kind of get on my soapbox there, but I just encourage you, I can give you the contact information for my younger leader friend if you'd like to reach out to her.
I think you said some really good things there, Sherry. And I do want to because we have a lot of women on here who identified at the first of this webinar that they were over 60 years old. Number one, the church needs you. Your younger women need you, and they need you to be that example, and they need you for friendship, and they need you for mentorship. They need godly women who will invest in them. And then, also, ladies, if you're over the age of 60, let the young women lead. They're going to lead differently than you. So just be there to support them and help them, but allow them to kind of, take the lead and encourage them along the way. I think sometimes we think that we have to do it the way that we did it, 20, 30 years ago. So they're not going to do it the same way, and that's okay. But you still need to be there to help them. And you know what? Are they going to make mistakes? Absolutely. And you know what? The best thing you can do is to be there to cheer them on and say, I'm right here. I'm going to help you. What did we learn from this? How can we do this differently? What can I do to help you be a better leader? And so I just want to encourage you, if you're in that 60 plus age, number one, don't give up on ministry, and don't just say, hey, I've done my part. I'm done. Now it's the younger person's turn to do it. We need you. And then let them lead. And so I just want you to hear my heart on that. Also, just the Ministry to Women book that I did, we do have a whole chapter on this, and just talking about the importance of those connections with generations. So that's really good. Well, we're just about out of time. Some of the questions that I was looking at are really more like statements and things like that. One person, there's a question that just came in that I think this is interesting, that time and day seem to be an issue for meetings or events. Older women can meet on weekdays when younger women can't. And even when you meet at night or weekends, then younger women can't. Well, finding that time, because some people work, some people don't, some people drive at night, some people don't drive at night, all those things. So I'm going to let this be our last question because we just have a couple minutes. Denise, I'm gonna point to you. How do we deal with the time? Like, how do we program things for meeting that need?
Yeah, so I think that the biggest issue for women who are older is the issue of driving at night. And so what better way to begin some relationships by having someone be willing, that's younger, that doesn't mind driving, be willing to pick them up. I don't think it's because they go to bed early. I don't think it's because they turn into pumpkins after it gets dark outside. I think it's just that matter of driving. And so, ask somebody who would be willing to pick up, sister so-and-so and bring her to the event or bring her to this thing. It was so cool that happened in a generational panel that I was doing. And the youngest member of the panel, when she heard the oldest member say, I don't come because I don't drive at night, she just leaned over and looked at her and said, I'll come get you. And it was just the sweetest thing ever. And so it's not really that hard. We just need to think, okay, what's the obstacle and how is a productive way to get over it?
Such a good, practical answer. Help these women out. And again, it goes back to that in personal invitation, Tasha, that we talked about too, that's so important. When someone actually says, hey, would you go with me to things like that? So whether that's a Bible study, whether that's an event, whether it's a service project, all of those things are super important. Well, ladies, thank you so much for joining us. And I apologize again for just the connections not always being great here. But I appreciate Tasha and Sherry and Denise, all that they do. And thank you for joining us. And we've got another webinar coming up in a couple of months. And we're going to be talking about how you adapt to leadership change. So be looking for that information, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.